Welcome back to Morning Joe. It's Tuesday, June 24th. Jonathan Lemire and Susan Page are still with us. Donald Trump walking to Air Force One as he plans his trip to The Hague in the Netherlands for NATO summit, where most of the NATO countries have pledged, are going to pledge that they'll be spending 5% of their GDP on military expenditures, obviously something that Donald Trump has been pursuing for a very long time. But Jonathan Lemire, the president, holding a press avail before leaving the White House as he was going to the helicopter, Marine One, and very angry with Israel, very angry with Iran, saying they didn't know what the F they were doing. According to reports, we're getting the video fed into us right now. But take us through it. He expects the ceasefire to hold and is not pleased that it's not.
Yeah, it's been an eventful few minutes. As we discussed earlier in the show, the ceasefire was agreed to, President Trump trumpeting it. But, these things are messy. It didn't end precisely at the time.
Takes a while.
Yeah, it does. It often does. And apparently a missile from Iran did get through, landed in Israel. There have been some casualties, a couple of fatalities. And Israel's now publicly saying they're going to hit back with full force. And that is what has really agitated President Trump this morning. We just showed you video. He did not talk to reporters at Joint Base Andrews, but he did a few minutes prior while leaving the White House, getting on Marine One as he heads to NATO. Poll reports indicate a very angry President Trump, as you says, criticizing both countries, Israel and Iran, saying, quote, they've been fighting for so long and so hard, they don't know what the F they're doing. He did not abbreviate that. And he also took to Truth Social right around the same time an all-caps message squarely at Israel, saying, Israel, do not drop those bombs. If you do, it is a major violation. Bring your pilots home now. Donald J. Trump, Lord. President of the United States. So he really is hoping this ceasefire holds. It is not, at least just yet. And we have seen, Joe, about as angry, I'm told there, about as angry as President Trump has been in public in a long time this morning.
Here we go.
Bombs, the likes of which I've never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
Do you have to respond to Iran?
Joining me now is staff writer at The New Yorker, Susan Glasser, former California Democratic Congresswoman Jane Harman, and MSNBC contributor and columnist Charlie Sykes. Susan, I'll get to these individual leaders in just a second, but if I can ask you big picture, what are the stakes of this ceasefire holding right now?
Well, that's right. I mean, I think you saw President Trump's very overheated outburst this morning, dropping the F-bomb on live TV. Why did he do that? He clearly understands that the stakes are enormous for his credibility, not only in the region, but as he heads to a crucial summit meeting with all of the U.S.'s NATO allies in Europe. This is a moment where Trump's decisions are being tested also and questioned unusually by many within his own MAGA political coalition. So I feel like, the frayed nerves are representation of how very high the stakes are right now. So that's number one. Number two, of course, is beware the initial overheated claims. Some of what we're hearing right now from Trump's defenders is, really remarkable considering we actually don't really know yet the results of these strikes, and they could lead to, let's hope they do, lead to a better outcome, an outcome with Iran no longer meaningfully able to pursue its nuclear program, but it could also lead to Iran doubling down on its nuclear program. So I just feel like the stakes are enormous, but the results are not yet clear.
Yeah, Congresswoman, let me start with Benjamin Netanyahu. He's been a constant presence in Israeli politics since the 90s. And I think certainly when you were on the Intel Committee and Homeland Security Intel Committee, he was around. So what are you watching for from him and how he'll impact the future of the region?
Well, he's an amazing survivor. Some claim that this invasion timing of Iran was his way to avoid a no-confidence vote. And I think that may be true. He was going to face an election soon, which some thought he would lose. Now, nationalism is rising in Israel, and people are congratulating him. But this is very fragile. Susan is right, and I'm on the more pessimistic side. Negotiating is fine. President Trump, however, this morning used the F-bomb, and negotiating is not a four-letter word. In order to have this come out in a way that satisfies both sides and the U.S. so that the fighting stays stopped is going to be very tricky because objectives are different. The Iranians don't want to give up their nuclear capability. They have the know-how. I think they still have a lot of the materials. And conversely, that's Israel's bottom line demand and Trump's. So how do you get to half of that or 2/3 of that? So I'm watching carefully, but I don't think yet that the answer is clear. And I think that Bibi Netanyahu dodged a bullet, but there may be more bullets, not literally, but maybe even, I hope not, in his future. Because if he doesn't pull this off, and if allegedly he's shooting people in Gaza and all these other problems are still there and the hostages don't come home, the remaining ones who are alive, it's a huge problem.
Susan, let's talk about another unclear answer. Okay, so we know that in Iran, the Ayatollah, who is 86, has gone into hiding with his family. The regime change question is being argued. For some, it's a question of whether he's taken out by political forces or assassination. Reports are he's had a 3-man committee working on his potential replacement. What are the chances that he survives this conflict? And if he does not, that something better would be put in his place?
Well, first of all, look, when you have an 86-year-old leader and a very a very opaque regime inside Iran, the answer is that we don't know an awful lot. But remember that the outcome here is not just either the status quo or some kind of liberal democracy that materializes. And unfortunately, the story of the last few decades in world politics is that many times the turnover in power leads to potentially an even worse outcome, not only chaos and instability being a possibility when a government that has essentially run around since 1979, if that were to fall, it's very possible that the people with the money and guns, to be blunt, in that society may acquire more power. In the short term, I think there are reliable reports. You look at some of the commentary from my friend, the excellent Kareem Sajapur from the Carnegie Endowment, and he has pointed out, I think very correctly, that in the short term, the voices of the people who were urging negotiations with Donald Trump and with the West are undercut by this war that Netanyahu has launched and Trump's decision to join in on it. So in the short term, at least, it's very likely to me that the moderates may be undercut inside the Iranian government circles and that the hardliners, at least for now, might emerge with somewhat more power. But again, that's part of what makes engaging in a war so very unpredictable. We don't know right now if it's a great triumph or not.
Yeah, and Congresswoman, let me go back to something Susan said earlier, which is the final battle damage assessment is still not finished. We don't know what Iran's capabilities are. How much of the outcome of all of this do you think may ultimately be, if not decided, heavily influenced by that intelligence and how it informs all three leaders and I guess potentially impacts them politically?
Well, let's start with the fact that obliterated, which was the word that the Secretary of Defense and President Trump used, is not a military term. And for sure, everything was not obliterated. The Iranians continue to possess the know-how. And there are reports that private commercial satellites took pictures of what seemed to be allegedly some of the material taken out of Fordo 3 days ahead, and then some mud put in the entrance to Fordo. So this was telegraphed in obvious ways, and the Iranians are smart cookies, and they prepared. But in addition to that, there may be other facilities that we don't know about. There's certainly, it's not just highly enriched uranium that we care about. We also care about the machinery to make bombs. That could be somewhere else. It also could be gettable from rogue states like North Korea. North Korea is teaching Iran that if you have nukes, you survive. Let's remember, Ukraine gave up its nukes in 1994 in exchange for a promise from the Russians and others to respect its sovereignty, and look where it is. So I think we have to assume that it ain't over till it's over, and it probably ain't over in terms of Iran possessing the capability to break out a nuclear bomb.
And Charlie, of course, the third leader, but arguably the most influential in all this, President Trump. His involvement in Iran comes in direct opposition to his long-stated America First agenda and, of course, what he campaigned on.
And I was the only president in decades who didn't start a war. Instead, I got us out of wars and endless wars. I will put America first every single time, every single day. You don't want to have wars. I ended wars.
I call it America first. This is the policy that built this country, and this is the policy that will save our country.
They said, he will start a war. I'm not going to start a war. I'm going to stop wars.
His supporters will argue that that's exactly what he just did, was stop a war. Is America First dead? Is MAGA reimagined? How do you see all this?
Well, MAGA is Donald Trump, and I think we're seeing that playing out in real time, that, in fact, they are, lining up behind him. But, Donald Trump, has been railing against these endless wars for decades. What he's hoping for is this is one and done, right? You could see that with the tension and the stress this morning when he's dropping the F-bombs. But the problem with the Middle East is that none of these problems are easily solved, and the discussion has been excellent so far. We are still in a very, very, we are in early days. The outcome is unpredictable. The instability in the Middle East, I think, has been accelerated. And the question is, does Donald Trump actually understand or know what he has unleashed? I think there's a tendency sometimes to see these things in terms of news cycles. We're on day 3. Many of the players in the Middle East will look at this in terms of decades. They will take the long term, and what will happen with Iran, and how many other countries are watching this and realizing, this is the reason why we need to have nuclear weapons. This is the reason why we cannot be vulnerable anymore. So I'm looking at this in terms of the long-term nuclear proliferation, because anyone who thinks that Donald Trump has just simply been the executive producer of a 48-hour Trump show in the Middle East, I think is incredibly naive.
I think it was one of your colleagues, Susan, at The New Yorker, who recently wrote about Donald Trump and his patience. He's not been known for it. All you have to do is look back to his campaign once again, where he said he was going to solve all these problems in 24 hours, or maybe even before he took office. He's come up against the reality of how complex the world really is. But how much does patience play into this, Susan?
Yeah, I mean, Charlie is absolutely right to spotlight this as sort of a contest between the kind of, 24-hour news cycle version of producing the presidency, which is often how Donald Trump looks at it, and the actual long-term challenges that any president, Democrat or Republican, would face. I mean, we're talking about literally a generation of American presidents. All of America's Cold War presidents, from Bill Clinton on, have been absolutely obsessed with this question of Iran and its possibility to build a nuclear weapon. This is an issue that was keeping Bill Clinton up at night. George W. Bush, Barack Obama, of course, negotiated the nuclear deal that Donald Trump withdrew from. And this, I think, is a great answer to your question. Back in 2018, Donald Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, although our own intelligence estimates did not find that Iran was not in compliance with it. In fact, Donald Trump's own defense secretary and secretary of state at the time argued for the United States to stay into that nuclear deal. You could say that while Donald Trump might have impulsively decided to join in this Israeli campaign after Netanyahu launched it a couple weeks ago, that in reality, some version of this conflict was made inevitable by the decision that Donald Trump took back in 2018. And I just think that's a great example of, I look at a lot of the coverage today and it's hysterical. It is literally breathless, without any context, without any history. Donald Trump already has a long history of dealing with this issue. And I think that it's his own actions that in many ways that were a precursor to the inevitability of the strike that we are seeing over the last few days.
Is this bombshell whistleblower complaint rocking the Trump DOJ and administration? It alleges a top Trump official said the DOJ could plot to tell the courts, F you, and ignore judicial orders that the president didn't like, which is what happens in autocratic regimes. This is a new, damning account of an assault on the rule of law. It comes from a very solid source, a longtime DOJ attorney who was in the room, who worked directly for these Trump appointees, who witnessed them firsthand knowledge, strong testimony. And this individual recounts how his refusal to lie led him to be later ousted. The source is a detailed, meticulous complaint. This is not one quote or one interview. It is now a formal process, not unlike other whistleblowers that we've covered throughout many decades in American life. And whistleblowers, even in this current Trump era, even if he didn't like it and wants it to be otherwise, are legally protected. Indeed, that's one of the reasons this is news tonight, which we'll get into, because the written complaint has been provided to Congress and the public. And it's leading to these kind of bombshell New York Times headlines. Justice Department leader suggested violating court orders, whistleblower says. The confession here is from the top of the Justice Department. The now fired DOJ lawyer, Erez Raveni, writing about this with the emails and documents, contemporaneous accounts, as the lawyers say, to back him up. So while some people might have thought this is where Trump wanted to go or assumed his senior aides were trying to do this at DOJ, I can tell you, as a lawyer, as a legal journalist, as someone following this all these times, all these months, this is the most damning inside account that they did deliberately want to violate court orders, according to the whistleblower. Comes down to a senior Justice Department official, Emil Bove, also a former Trump criminal defense lawyer, who told subordinates that he would, in this clash, potentially ignore these court orders to get whatever Trump wanted. Judges be damned. The Constitution be damned. And that means, in the end, democracy and the rule of law be damned, because everything we do as a country, and one thing that's always separated the United States from many other less democratic countries, is that the rule of law holds. That's why when there are disputes, like a famous one you've heard of, Bush v. Gore, and the election didn't resolve it necessarily clearly, instead of turning to violence in the streets or a military coup, which is quite common in many countries, when the Supreme Court rules, people followed it. That included the people who benefited, say in that case, Bush, but also everyone, half the country, who didn't benefit, who wanted the other side, people supporting Gore. That was a quarter century ago, 25 years ago. We didn't have big open questions about whether the government would follow the rules and the law, whether the court order would be followed, and whether there'd be violence. Tonight, I'm telling you, not to alarm you, but to make sure you understand what's happening out there, that is not so certain under these Trump officials. Some of them seeking even more power after now being busted today for admitting their view is FU. Now, in the immigration clash where Bove reportedly said this, quote, DOJ would need to consider telling the courts FU, and he said the whole thing, and ignore any such court order. I'm going to show you more of these details because the whistleblower recounts that then the others in the room, some longtime DOJ officials, some who might be sympathetic to Trump's deportation goals, quote, looked stunned. And they observed awkward, nervous glances among people in the room. Silence overtook the room. That's the senior DOJ official telling DOJ lawyers, ignore the rule of law and the orders if you need to, and to put a little extra on it, FU to the courts, to the judges. Now, this was a key part of the Trump administration's deportation agenda, which everyone can see is one of the places where they want to do the most quickly, but also are testing legal powers, saying we're at war, saying there's rebellion or invasion, and apparently saying if they don't get what they want, well, they've got some people in place who'll get there however they need to. You see the then defendant Trump flanked by this person. It's very controversial that Trump has put in so many individuals who were part of his personal legal team to run the country. And the allegation, the whistleblower complaint, is that's not working out very well. That same individual's up for a big judgeship nominated by Trump. This is a clue to the kind of people that Trump wants on the courts. Whether he would want his own orders disobeyed if he got in there is a separate question. But of course, the whole point is they want to control this in a way where there are no actual binding court orders against them. And if they stack the courts, then they don't have to worry about that. And that's the whistleblower's contention, that this is lawless. Now, we're talking about whether they're going to get somewhere ending the rule of law or breaking the Constitution to get autocratic results any which way they want. You should recall Trump actually lost the key SCOTUS round in this case at the center of the whistleblower's account. And the Trump administration has been under scrutiny exactly along these lines. We've heard a more sanitized or kind of vague version of this, not with an FU, mind you. But what's important is today's evidence adds to the view, the very damning account, that there has been a coordinated strategy from the top to soften up, chip away at the rule of law and the courts in this country so that someday they may just ignore them entirely.
I believe there was a court order there that upheld, which has now been, I think, correctly repudiated by virtually everyone, a court order that upheld the internment of Japanese civilians in internment camps during.
As bad as it was, that court order was followed for years, was it not?
And I just wonder whether some historians might think we'd be better off if it hadn't been followed.
That's what it sounds like on the record. That's a top Trump lawyer as well, was at DOJ, saying, I wonder if it'd be better not to follow. Now we're learning, when you match that up behind the scenes, other DOJ officials at the top, which Trump is now trying to promote, are saying, yeah, F you, that's exactly what we want to do. When sometimes people say, is it alarmist to talk about autocratic instincts in the Trump administration? The problem is alarmist misses the whole issue. They're the ones admitting it and saying it. It's almost like their defenders want to wish or pretend they don't admit that the plan is to not follow court orders you don't like. Now, this whistleblower says his boss asked him effectively to lie, and he had to choose between what was basically an unlawful instruction and what normally judges and lawyers could be disbarred for, right? Committing perjury in court, risking his job or more, and he chose to take the risk. It's a bombshell allegation, a blatant discussion of defying court orders. If this proves to be true, and the lawyer here has written it down on good faith after being ousted, taking great personal risk, this is what we call a pretty credible account, then you can't put this up on your screen or on the internet enough for people to understand that the autocratic threat is admitted, an FU to court oversight. And if the administration can get away with this, let me be clear with you tonight, it's bigger than an immigration case or policies. It is how you plot to end the rule of law. Judges are supposed to be the backstop. We hear about that on a ton of issues. Where can the National Guard go? What are the war powers? Are some immigrants being mistreated in a way where they need to be better provided due process? But if they end judicial oversight completely, well, you won't have elections and democracy itself. I'm joined by Andrew Weissmann, a longtime DOJ vet, FBI general counsel, prosecutor. How do you view the significance and the credibility of this whistleblower account?
Sure. Well, if the whistleblower is to be believed, it is what you are saying, which is this is an insider account of the end of the rule of law. I mean, there's no two ways to sugarcoat this. I want to make sure people understand who this whistleblower is. Mm-hmm. This is not some political hack or disgruntled employee. This is somebody who was at the department for 15 years. He was in the immigration field. He was most recently promoted to his position and lauded by the Trump administration itself. And he takes pains to point out that he supported and advocated in court many policies that I think a lot of your viewers
would find deplorable. In other words, he was one of the people who defended the so-called Muslim ban in the Trump 1.0 administration. So he is no sort of, lily-livered, MSNBC, Democrat, whatever, epithet somebody wants to call him. And he recounts that Stephen Miller has used those epithets in disparaging him. This is somebody who is a true insider, and he ends his 35-page complaint by saying, I didn't sign up to lie. And he recounts over and over again ways in which numerous cases in which judges are holding contempt proceedings currently, he recounts how this administration either made false statements or decided, as you noted in fairly vulgar language, decided to just not comply with court orders. Many of my colleagues who are, sort of career Republicans, career Democrats who serve in the Department of Justice would be equally appalled at that. This is not a partisan issue. You do not react to the courts that way because at the end of the day, it's not just the rule of law. There are people whose lives were affected. There are people who were removed in violation of court order, who were extracted, whose rights were violated. Remember, the Supreme Court determined 9-0 that the due process rights of the people in El Salvador were extracted by the Trump administration, were violated. That is what this whistleblower is getting at, is the inside story of how that happened and his efforts to get the administration to comply with the law.
It is day 156 of the second Trump administration. Tonight, NBC News is reporting an initial assessment by U.S. intelligence concluded that President Trump's strikes on Iran only set back the country's nuclear program by months, as opposed to Trump's claims that it was obliterated. The White House is already pushing back, calling the assessment flat out wrong. My colleague Kelly O'Donnell has all these details. Watch this.
Tonight, President Trump in the Netherlands for the NATO summit, wielding a diplomatic win on the world stage, with the tenuous ceasefire between Israel and Iran still holding.
The ceasefire is very much in effect, and I think we're going to keep it there for a long time.
The president projected more confidence that the U.S. airstrikes on 3 Iranian nuclear sites, which included B-2 bombers, 14 bunker buster bombs, delivered a fateful blow. Photos before and after appear to show significant destruction at the sites. However, in a new development tonight, a preliminary assessment by the Defense Intelligence Agency estimates that the Iranian nuclear program has been delayed by 3 to 6 months, according to 3 people with knowledge of the report. The White House disputes that initial assessment, calling it flat out wrong.
Iran will never rebuild its nuclear. From there, absolutely not. That place is under rock. That place is demolished. The B-2 pilots did their job.
And this tonight from the director of the UN's nuclear watchdog.
What we see is a very important degree of damage. The Iranian nuclear program has been set back significantly.
Still, his all-cap style of diplomacy under stress tonight. The red carpet European welcome, quite a contrast to the blunt and profane way he left Washington today. Furious over additional strikes by both Israel and Iran after he outlined his ceasefire plan.
We basically have 2 countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing.
In flight on Air Force One, he recounted a tense call with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu.
There was going to be a retaliation this morning.
Behind the scenes, a senior White House official says the president, over the past 48 hours, had called Netanyahu with a clear demand: no more war. Then a trio of top officials, Vance, Rubio, and Witkoff, were directed to reach out to Iran to deliver the message that a ceasefire was expected.
We got a lot to cover tonight, so let's get smarter with the help of our lead-off panel this evening. Jeff Mason joins us, White House correspondent for Reuters. Kara Lenig, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter with The Washington Post. Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, retired commander of the U.S. Army in Europe. And former Republican Congressman David Jolly. He is running for Florida governor, wait for it, as a Democrat. All right, General, let's start with you. This early U.S. intelligence reportedly found the strikes only sealed off entrances to the facilities but did not collapse them, and much of the near bomb-grade uranium was already taken out. What is your reaction to all of this?
It's an early assessment, Stephanie, first of all. Secondly, it's conducted by the Defense Intelligence Agency. Now, that agency is not as sexy as the CIA. Not many people know what they do, but they are the experts primarily at a bunch of things, one of which is bomb damage assessment. They use different kinds of INTs, the intelligence systems. They use imagery intelligence coming from satellites, from overhead platforms. They use signals intelligence that captures communications both before and after a strike from the area. And it basically allows you to determine what's going on at the place. They use something called MASINT, Measurement and Signals Intelligence, which can detects chemical, radiological, and physical changes to the surface. They have human intelligence that falls in on this, reports from the ground, agents on the ground, people who are reporting back to the defense headquarters. They use open source intelligence using Twitter feeds and all kinds of social media to go bouncing back and forth to determine what's real and what's not. And finally, they use cyber intelligence, and that confirms or denies with the use of command and control assets. So this has a lot of substance to it. It's a low confidence in the early report, but it is an early report. And as many of us in the military have been saying the last couple of days, when the president said obliterated, it was way too early to say that. We were much more confident when General Kane the next day said, we're waiting and seeing what's going on. All of those things are important, and you can't judge. The first reports are always wrong. Always to the military guys. So you got to wait for a little bit more information before you start proclaiming victory.
Well, let's assume this report is near correct or mostly correct. How far are we basically going to be in the same place we are with Iran 6 months from now, if it only sets them back a few months in their nuclear development plans?
Could be, but what I'd suggest is what's going to happen over the next couple of days and weeks are going to be important because it changes the dynamics. If the nuclear capability is still there and President Trump is declaring a ceasefire between the two nations, this is not going to please Israel all that much. They're going to continue to strike because their mission was to destroy the nuclear capabilities of Iran. Iran is going to probably have a whole lot of pressure on saying, hey, we've just been bobbed to oblivion and it didn't strike anything and we still have the capability to produce. So let's hurry up and get one quick. So all of those things play into a bunch of what ifs that military planners, defense planners, government planners have to take into account. And it changes the dynamic of the situation. This is where prior to the strike, red teaming would have been a whole lot better off to predict the kinds of dynamics that would occur if you don't get the effects that you're looking for in these bombing runs.
Jeff, you are in the Netherlands covering President Trump at the NATO summit. We know his inner circle here is already pushing back on this intelligence assessment, but the assessment is from the Pentagon, right? How is that going to go over, with the exception of, I'm sure the White House is mad at them?
Yeah, I'm anticipating that it's not going to go over well. The president is scheduled to do a press conference later in the day. It's the next day here in the Netherlands today after meeting with NATO leaders, and no doubt this is one of the top questions that will come up. He expressed a great deal of dissatisfaction from the White House, and that was in Kelly's report earlier with the media and with news networks for casting doubt on the success of the strike when he was talking about that just was as he was departing the White House for NATO. And so I'm sure that he will, dissatisfaction is probably a polite way of saying that he will express that again with regard to this report. In general, the president is all caps. I loved how Kelly said that. person. And his initial response is always going to say, or to be one of taking full credit. And often exaggerating the success of whether it's a military mission or whether it's something else that he has gotten behind. That is harder to do when it's something that has intelligence or actual evidence of the rate of success that you're talking about. And now, within days of the strike, which the president portrayed, as we've been saying, as a major success, we're getting more intelligence and more information about what actually happened and the impact that it has. I also spoke to an analyst this week who, before this report came out, said the question remains whether this strike will deter Iran or lead it to even double down in terms of pursuing a clandestine nuclear weapon, and whether or not this bombing helped or hindered that. So this is just one more piece in the puzzle of kind of raising the question of whether the strike was successful in pursuing U.S. aims or not.
Carol, you have covered the president's relationship with the intel community. It wasn't good. But after this, I'm guessing it's going to be significantly worse?
It's such a critical point about this president, both in Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0. He distrusted intelligence officials from the get-go when he got into the presidency the first time around. And now he's just openly rejecting that intelligence, which doesn't match his political talking points. I mean, Jeff is so right that this is a president who wants always to project strength and to, score I'm trying to think of all the hyperbolic words I can think of how he wants to basically have a touchdown every single time he makes a move. And there is where you get the word obliterated. But keep in mind, Steph, on intelligence, the question you asked, Tulsi Gabbard came out with a statement before all of this happened in her testimony in which she said that it was a real question about whether Iran was able to produce a weapons-grade nuclear bomb in any kind of near term. And Donald Trump rejected that because he was already on the path, along with hawks in the Pentagon and along with Benjamin Netanyahu's strong encouragement to execute a strike. And so intelligence is less and less important to Donald Trump, and optics are really critical. The problem is you need good intelligence to make good decisions, not just for tomorrow or the next day, but for the security of the country for months and years to come.
Joaquin Castro of Texas. He is a member of the House Foreign Affairs and Intelligence Committees.
Welcome, Congressman. It's a pleasure having you. So let's just unpack this assessment a little bit more, because there are a couple of storylines that are emerging here. But for you as a member of Congress, sitting in a position on the Intelligence Committee to look at this information, how much will you be able to trust coming out of this administration when you finally, if ever, get that briefing that sort of lays out exactly what happened? Because we have quotes here from one of the three sources saying we were assuming that the damage was going to be much more significant than this assessment is finding. So clearly there is some distance between where the White House is on this and what the intelligence community is looking at post the bombing. What do you anticipate?
Yeah, well, first, let's consider the context and how we got here. We had an agreement with Iran to contain their nuclear weapons program. That agreement was put in place during President Obama's presidency. And when Donald Trump became president, he took us out of that agreement. And so at that point, it became harder to know how quickly they were enriching uranium and how close they were to developing a nuclear weapon. That said, all of the intelligence that I saw beforehand, the military, diplomatic, and intelligence assessment, didn't suggest that there was an imminent threat that Iran had a functional, deliverable nuclear weapon. Because it's not just about enriching uranium. There's several other steps that a country has to take to have that functional nuclear weapon. And so what we have now, after the United States got involved in the war, dropped all those bombs on the nuclear facilities, is we had Donald Trump essentially exaggerating and overstating, which is not unusual for him, but exaggerating the damage that was done. And I can't comment because I'm on the Intelligence Committee about a particular assessment, but it's my belief, after looking at everything, that the president lied about the amount of damage that was done. And so the danger now is if, in fact, they still have the ability to develop a nuclear weapon within months, for example, then we could be in this situation again, where Israel strikes at Iran again and tries to get the United States to go along. That could be a few months, it could be within a year, but it would essentially mean that we're caught in this endless loop of a warring Iran and Israel and the United States being asked to get involved.
Not asking you to comment on the contents of the assessment, but the classified assessment in question, sir. We now have Senate Democrats who have told NBC News that they have seen the document, who are on the relevant committees. Have you seen this document in question?
I've seen an assessment of what happened. I'll just say that.
All right. You want to pick up, Simone? You have a follow-up there? I'm sure you have many.
I guess my only follow-up is, you note that the president has a tendency to exaggerate. And I would agree with you. I think folks at home, the question they might ask is, and why is that a problem? Because if a lot of people are making this out to be that, this is just how the president does business. But I think you've hit a nail on the head here. Why is his exaggeration an issue, particularly when it comes to intelligence, military strikes, actions that the United States has taken?
Well, first, he didn't go to Congress for any kind of authorization. And so he did this unilaterally. He overstepped his bounds. But remember, when we talk about a president lying about something or exaggerating, this is not a matter of crowd size at an inauguration. This is a matter of war and potentially risking, or not potentially, actually risking American service members' lives in that war, and risking getting us more deeply involved as well. Over the past week, and especially over the weekend, as all this was taking place, I had so many people in San Antonio, Texas, where I represent, that's known as Military City, USA, who reached out to me and said, we don't want to get involved in another long and messy and very expensive war in the Middle East. And so they saw us going down that same road that we went down with Iraq, where based on biased or bad intelligence, a president makes a decision and essentially makes a mistake that could cost thousands of lives of American service members.
Congressman, you had the president complaining about both Israel and Iran, saying they don't know what the F they're doing. Is that a policy shift or a mood shift on the part of the president?
I mean, I think that he's upset that this is me trying to piece together what happened, but I think that he was trying to cajole them into a ceasefire, and they didn't do that immediately. And he doesn't like it that people don't listen to him right away. And so he got upset on the White House lawn. But based on everything I'm seeing, I'm telling you, I would be surprised if this ceasefire holds. And I want to be clear, I hope that it does. I hope that it holds. I don't want Iran to develop a nuclear weapon, but I believe that the best way to do that, and the proven way to do that, is by coming to some kind of agreement with them that restricts their nuclear arms program. Otherwise, I do think that we're going to be in this situation again.
But Congressman, let's break this down a little bit more. There is a reason why Iran has been, in my estimation, a little bit cavalier about all of this, in the sense that there's not been this heightened kind of reaction. A sort of a tepid response. Okay, we're going to give you a heads up. We're going to drop a few bombs on a couple of bases and call it a night. Because they know what damage was and was not done to their facilities. They know that what Donald Trump did only took them out of the game for about 3 to 6 months at worst. So when you see and hear individuals like Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt, screeding against CNN and MSNBC and others who are reporting on this assessment with, quote, this alleged assessment is flat out wrong and was classified as top secret, but was still leaked to CNN by an anonymous low-level loser in the intelligence community. Caroline, it could have been a rather high-level poser. I mean, you don't know where it came from. So, this sort of name-calling reaction by the administration tells me, at least, they got stuck and stung on this. So from your position on the Intelligence Committee, and I took to heart the way you answered Simone's question, there's a little bit more there in terms of what's being reported about this assessment that sticks rather than not sticks.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, you could be right that Iran, after they did the damage assessment on their own, decided that it was not a fatal blow to their program. And so there was no need for them to get into a really all-out war with the United States or with Israel and made that assessment. That is quite possible. But again, it speaks to the fact that you could have this continuing cycle of Israel and Iran going at each other and fighting, and Israel asking the United States to get involved. And remember, the reason I say that is because Israel, they didn't have the weapons necessary, the bombers and the bombs necessary to take out these facilities on their own. So when Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, made a decision to hit those facilities, he knew that the only way he could finish the job, possibly, was by getting the United States involved in a war. And that's going to be the case a month from now, 2 months from now, or a year from now. And we'll be back at it.